Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. I'm Natalia Moczulska, and this is the news. Russians are furious after the school building on Kielecka Street in Warsaw was returned to Poland, according to a court ruling. Moscow's ambassador says it violated the Vienna Convention and trespassed on a diplomatic facility. The Kremlin threatens to draw consequences, announces a harsh response, and former President Medvedev writes on Twitter about the extermination of stinking rats. Poland responds firmly that the property on Kielecka Street did not have diplomatic status, and the execution process is simply the recovery of property belonging to the state treasury. On behalf of the Polish state, Warsaw has taken over buildings on Kielecka Street that were illegally occupied by the Russian embassy. The Russian side refused to open the gate, thus officials decided to call in a locksmith. The capital city of Warsaw, which represents the state treasury, has taken possession through bailiff actions of the property at 45 Kielecka Street. It has thus fulfilled the ruling of the district court in Warsaw, which ordered the Russian Federation to hand over the property. There were 27 people living in the seized buildings, who voluntarily left the property and received assurances that all things belonging to them and constituting school equipment would be handed over to them by the city. We can't afford to allow another country to have properties without legal title, without any consequences on the territory of the Polish capital. These things are scandalous that it was only after 30 years that this was effectively enforced. The case was scandalously addressed on Twitter by former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. After a while, the social network decided that the post broke the rules and removed it. I don't see any point in maintaining diplomatic relations with Poland. This country for us should not exist, as long as there are absolute Russophobes in power and Polish mercenaries are in Ukraine. The latter must be ruthlessly exterminated like stinking rats. Unfortunately, this is not the first time that former President Medvedev has spoken about Poland in an arrogant manner, in a way that is completely alien to the diplomatic world. This is rather indicative of his poor mental state. The issue of illegally occupied buildings by Russians was covered by Gazeta Polska back in the 1990s. Taking real estate away from Russians is a serious problem for them, as they shrink plans to conquer Poland from within. They can very easily take advantage of those advantages that come from penetrating the country from the inside, whether by agents or by these facilities. These facilities were supposed to replace the Russian bases, the ones the Russians withdrew from in 1990. It was precisely these facilities that were supposed to replace those bases. Moreover, they were in much more dangerous places than the Russian bases. The property at 45 Kielecka Street had belonged to Jan Kiepura since 1936. After the war, the communists took over the building under a Bierut decree. In 1953, the government of the People's Republic of Poland transferred the property free of charge for an indefinite loan to the Soviet embassy in Warsaw. In 2010, the city terminated the agreement with the Russian side, and as of 2011, it was pursuing legal action to reclaim the property. Yesterday's fire at the fuel base in Sevastopol caused panic among Russians who were rushing to leave Crimea, and in their vacation applications, they all clearly indicated their destination as mainland Russia. But there was also a solid fire there today, as military rocket launcher plants in Perm were burning in the morning. Television stations from Sweden and Finland taped an interview with President Zelensky, and reporters asked about the counteroffensive. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly called for expanding Western military aid to Ukraine to include multi-role combat aircraft. The Ukrainian Air Force has Soviet-era fighters at its disposal. The last time Zelensky pressed NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg on the issue was at a meeting in Kiev on April 20th. We cannot postpone the counteroffensive indefinitely. We are capable of ending this war. However, success will not happen overnight. While we know how to do it effectively, therefore we cannot ignore strategic assumptions. There are countries that have F-16s and are ready to support us. We hope that the support will arrive on time, but we will start the campaign even without F-16 fighters. Precision attacks by Ukrainian artillery forced the Russians to retreat from at least several positions in the south of Avdiivka. The front line in the region has returned to what it was at the beginning of the year, and the situation for the defenders has improved significantly. In the east of the country, Ukrainian forces are preparing for a counteroffensive. I wish it was dry. We are waiting for warm days to drain this swamp. Now the tracked vehicles are just standing still, but they will move to attack as soon as it gets warmer. They can't hide from us. As we say, if we don't have planes, then others won't have them either. Meanwhile, Russian artillery fire is constantly directed against Ukrainian civilian facilities. Yesterday, there were 7 missile attacks and 39 airstrikes, as well as 50 from ground-based missile systems. When the fire broke out, my relative and her daughter were still sleeping in the living room. They managed to run out. Both suffered multiple burns and are now on their way to the hospital. Why did the Russians come here? Why? People enjoyed life, had families and homes. Now we have nothing. Yesterday, there was an attack on a fuel base in Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula. It is likely that combat drones were used for this operation. The main target of the attack was fuel tanks that are strategic reserves of the Russian army. A fire also broke out at a plant producing rocket launcher systems in Perm, central Russia. An attack by unmanned aerial vehicles followed in the morning. Unfortunately, it proved effective and led to extensive fire. The situation was brought under control. The destruction of Russian army logistics is part of preparations for the Ukrainian counteroffensive. I got up at night, went to the kitchen and heard a light popping sound. I thought that it was the air defense working as usual. I went to bed, and only in the morning did I see what had happened in the news. Yevgeny Prigozhin, founder of Russia's Wagner Group, believes that Russian forces in eastern Ukraine should begin preparations for defense. Prigozhin fears that Russian positions could be forced through by Ukrainian forces. Yesterday, tens of thousands of Israelis took to the streets, protesting against the plans by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's nationalist religious government to push through curbs on the judiciary they see as an existential threat to democracy. For the 17th week now, protests in Tel Aviv became a weekly must, while yesterday's protest is seen of higher significance since it is held 2 days ahead of the opening of Knesset's summer session and 2 days after the largest right-wing demo in Jerusalem.
They came to protest against the move that the government is doing against the democracy of Israel, to make sure that our kids will have a democracy as we had during the past 75 years, and with prosperity and safety and a good place to live in as we have.
So I'm here to demonstrate with my husband, my 2 kids, because Israel is changing, and the democracy we have today and the economic thriving we have today is thanks to what it is right now. There is equal opportunities for everyone, for men, for women, and if the things will happen as the government can change it right now, this will not be the case. And I want my kids to have a good future here.
The government and its supporters say that the changes are needed to rein in activist judges who have intruded aggressively into the sphere of parliament and the executive, but agreed last month to pause the plans to allow for more consultation. For many Israelis, the standoff has opened up profound questions about their country that go beyond the makeup of the Supreme Court and the power of the executive to override its decisions. Earlier today, tens of thousands crowded into a Budapest square to attend Pope Francis's open-air mass, marking his 3-day visit to Hungary. Waving at huge crowds and smiling, Pope Francis arrived in his famous Pope-mobile as the crowd cheered on Budapest's central Kossuth Square. More than 50,000 people gathered in and around the square behind Budapest's iconic neo-Gothic Parliament building, a symbol of the capital on the Danube, to see the Pope on the last day of his visit to the country. It's a huge joy, and I see the happiness and commitment on the face of people to celebrate the Mass together with the Holy Father. Peter Show, Brok, leader of the Hungarian chapter of the St. Egidio Peace Community, who attended the Mass, agreed with the Pope's homily against doors closed to the world. There is a great temptation to be self-referential, meaning that we refer everything only to ourselves, only to our own reality, whereas there are other realities too. The realities of the poor, the realities of other nations, the realities of wars and injustices, and the Christians have a mission in the footsteps of Jesus to heal these. We are proud that we have come here, to our real homeland. For us, Hungary is our real homeland. We left at 3 a.m., and luckily we managed to get onto the square, and we got a good place, and we are very happy that so far everything went as we planned. We wanted a personal meeting with the Pope. In our life, probably this will be the last time that we can see a Pope in Hungary. Sunday's homily was the second time Pope Francis has used a religious context to make his point about migrants. On Friday, he quoted what Saint Stephen, the 11th century founder of Christian Hungary, had written about welcoming strangers. On Saturday, Pope Francis met about 600 refugees, poor and homeless people, in a visit to a Budapest church, a day after warning of the dangers of rising nationalism in Europe and telling the government of Prime Minister Viktor Orbán that accepting migrants along with the rest of the continent would be a true sign of Christianity. The 3-day trip is the Pope's first since he was admitted to hospital for bronchitis in March. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Please stay tuned for Poland Daily Weather, Poland Daily Business, and some of our other programs. But for me, have a wonderful evening.